Kamsi ordered the villagers around, taking what she wanted without asking, and never sharing even the smallest crumb with anyone. Her selfishness knew no bounds. When the old woman was brought before her, Princess Kamsi looked down at, disgusted by the woman's ragged appearance. "You're wasting my time, old woman," Kamsi snapped. "What could you possibly offer me?" Kamsi's eyes gleamed with greed. "Is that so?" she said, snatching the fruit from the basket. Without another word, she took a big, greedy bite. "Where is my food?" she demanded, tearing through the royal kitchens. She overturned baskets of grain and smashed open jars of honey. But no matter what she did, the food would vanish before her eyes. Once upon a time, deep in the heart of Africa, lay the village of Muchi. The people of Muchi were simple, hardworking farmers and hunters. They lived in peace and harmony, blessed with fertile lands and abundant wildlife. But there was one thing that troubled them. Princess Kamsi, the daughter of their king, was a glutton. Princess Kamsi was not only greedy but also proud, arrogant, rude, and stingy. She believed that because she was the king's only child, she could treat people however she liked. She would order the villagers around, take what she wanted without asking, and never share even the smallest crumb with anyone. Her selfishness knew no bounds. Every year, the village celebrated the Feast of Muchi, a grand festival where everyone gathered to give thanks for the bountiful harvest. Villagers from all corners of the kingdom would prepare delicious meals, perform dances, and tell stories around the fire. It was the highlight of the year, a time of joy and togetherness. But for Princess Kamsi, the Feast of Muchi was nothing more than an opportunity to gorge herself on the finest foods. She didn't care about the meaning behind the celebration. All she wanted was to eat and eat alone. Each year, she would make sure that the royal palace was filled with delicacies from every corner of the kingdom. Honey cakes from the east, roasted goat from the south, sweet yams from the west, and juicy fruits from the north. The villagers would watch as Princess Kamsi sat at the head of the table, stuffing herself while they barely had enough to eat. Many grew resentful, but no one dared speak out against her for fear of angering the king. One day, as preparations for the Feast of Muchi were underway, an old woman arrived at the palace gate. She was hunched over with age, her hair silver like the moon, and her eyes wise and kind. She carried a small woven basket on her arm, filled with herbs and flowers. "I've come to speak with the princess," the old woman said to the palace guards. They laughed at her and told her to leave. "The princess does not speak with commoners," they said, their voices mocking. But the old woman insisted. "Tell her that I have a special gift for the feast, something she will not want to miss." The guards, amused by the old woman's persistence, eventually relayed the message to Princess Kamsi. The princess, intrigued by the thought of a new delicacy, agreed to meet the woman in the grand hall. When the old woman was brought before her, Princess Kamsi looked down at her, disgusted by the woman's ragged appearance. "You're wasting my time, old woman," Kamsi snapped. "What could you possibly offer me?" The old woman smiled kindly and opened her basket, revealing a single golden fruit. Its skin shimmered like sunlight, and its fragrance filled the room with a sweet, intoxicating aroma. "This, dear princess, is the fruit of plenty," the old woman said. "It is no ordinary fruit. With it, you will never know hunger again. Just one bite, and your feast will be unlike any you have ever experienced." Kamsi's eyes gleamed with greed. "Is that so?" she said, snatching the fruit from the basket. Without another word, she took a big, greedy bite. As soon as the fruit touched her lips, Kamsi felt a strange warmth spread through her body. The taste was unlike anything she had ever tasted, sweet, tangy, and rich all at once. She smiled, satisfied, and dismissed the old woman with a wave of her hand. But as the old woman turned to leave, she said softly, Remember, Princess Kamsi, you must share the bounty you receive, or it will come at a great cost. Kamsi scoffed, too busy thinking about the grand feast she would enjoy that evening. That night, as the Feast of Muchi began, Princess Kamsi sat at the head of the table, her plate piled high with food. She felt a strange hunger gnawing at her, more intense than usual. No matter how much she ate, the hunger would not go away. She ordered the servants to bring her more and more food until the table overflowed with dishes. The villagers watched in shock as Kamsi devoured everything in sight, but her hunger only seemed to grow. She ate and ate, stuffing herself with roasted meats, fruits, and sweets. Yet it was never enough. Soon the entire palace kitchen was emptied, and still she demanded more. The villagers murmured among themselves. What is wrong with the princess? They wondered. Suddenly, something strange began to happen. The food on Kamsi's plate started to disappear, vanishing into thin air before she could even touch it. The more she reached for, the less she could eat. Panic flickered in her eyes as the piles of food vanished before her. What is this? Kamsi screamed, banging her fist on the table. Where is my food? The old woman's voice echoed in her mind. You must share the bounty, or it will come at a great cost. But it was too late. Kamsi had hoarded everything for herself, and now the feast had turned into a curse. As night wore on, Kamsi's hunger grew unbearable. She ran through the palace, searching for anything to eat, but everything she touched disappeared. She tore through the royal kitchens, overturned baskets of grain, and smashed open jars of honey, but no matter what she did, the food would vanish before her eyes. Her stomach growled with a ferocity she had never felt before, and her once beautiful face twisted in desperation. She had become a slave to her own greed. The villagers, seeing the princess's plight, began to whisper among themselves. She is cursed, they said. Her greed has brought this upon her. Kamsi, realizing that she could not eat another bite until she shared with others, rushed out of the palace and into the village. She offered the villagers food from the palace stores, but by then it was too late. The curse had already taken hold, and the food continued to vanish. No one could eat, not even the princess. Days passed, and the once proud and arrogant Princess Kamsi grew weaker and weaker. Her beautiful gowns hung loose on her shrinking frame, and her once radiant skin became pale and gaunt. She was no longer the powerful princess who had commanded respect and fear. She was a mere shadow of her former self. One day, as she lay weak and hungry on the palace steps, the old woman returned. She looked down at the pitiful sight of Kamsi and shook her head sadly. You were warned, child, the old woman said. Your greed has brought this curse upon you. You have learned the hard way that true abundance comes not from taking, but from giving. Tears filled Kamsi's eyes. Please, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I am sorry. I was selfish and cruel. I thought only of myself. Please lift this curse, I beg you. The old woman's eyes softened. The curse can only be lifted if you prove that you have truly changed. You must learn the value of humility, kindness, and generosity. Only then will the food return. Kamsi nodded, too weak to speak, but determined to make amends. She spent the following days helping the villagers, working alongside them in the fields, sharing what little she had, and apologizing to those she had wronged. Slowly but surely, the villagers began to forgive her, and the curse began to lift. One morning, after many days of hard work and sincere repentance, Kamsi awoke to find the palace kitchen filled with food once more. The curse was broken, but this time Kamsi did not hold the food for herself. Instead, she invited the entire village to the palace for a grand feast. As the villagers gathered around the table, Kamsi stood before them, humbled and grateful. I have learned a valuable lesson, she said. Greed and selfishness lead only to suffering. True happiness comes from sharing and caring for others. From now on, I vow to be a kind and generous ruler and to always put the needs of my people before my own. The villagers cheered, and for the first time in many years, Princess Kamsi shared her feast with everyone. The old woman, watching from the edge of the crowd, smiled and disappeared into the night, her work done. From that day forward, Princess Kamsi ruled the village of Muchi with kindness and wisdom. She became known not as the greedy princess, but as the generous queen, loved by all for her fairness and compassion. And so the village of Muchi prospered, its people living in peace and harmony, knowing that they had a queen who had learned the true meaning of abundance. As for the old woman, some say she was a wise elder who had come to teach Kamsi a lesson, while others believe she was a spirit sent by the gods. But one thing was certain, the fruit of plenty had given Princess Kamsi far more than she had ever expected. It had given her the wisdom to rule with a full heart rather than a full belly. As the years passed, Queen Kamsi became a beacon of hope and generosity for her people. Her palace was no longer filled with extravagant feasts for herself alone, but instead, it became a place where the villagers would gather to share meals, celebrate harvests, and tell stories. She made sure that no one in her kingdom went hungry, and she often walked among her people, giving freely of the palace's bounty and listening to their concerns. The once proud and arrogant princess had truly transformed. Her kindness was known far and wide, and neighboring villages often sought her counsel, admiring her wisdom and generosity. One day, when Kamsi had grown older, she gathered the children of the village to tell them the story of her transformation. Sitting in a circle beneath the great baobab tree, she spoke softly, her voice full of humility. "I was once like a bottomless well," she said. "No matter how much I took, it was never enough. But I learned that when you give freely, when you share what you have, you will always have plenty. The joy of seeing others happy is far greater than the joy of having everything to yourself." The children listened in awe, their eyes wide as they imagined the cursed feast and the magical fruit. One of the children, a curious boy named Tumi, raised his hand. "Your Highness," he asked, "what happened to the golden fruit? Did you ever see it again?" Kamsi smiled gently. "The fruit of plenty was not meant to be eaten in greed, but to teach a lesson. After I learned my lesson, it disappeared, as did the old woman who gave it to me. But its spirit lives on in every act of kindness, in every meal we share, and in every hand that reaches out to help another." Generations later, the story of Queen Kamsi was told not just in Muchi, but in villages and cities across the world. And so the story of the gluttonous princess and the magic feast lived on. In the end, the old woman's gift was not just the fruit, but the lesson that came with it, a lesson that continued to nourish the hearts of those who heard it, long after the fruit itself had vanished. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible story of Princess Kamsi's transformation. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned something valuable along the way. Your love and support mean the world to us, and we are so grateful to have you as part of our storytelling family. If you enjoyed this tale, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an exciting story on this channel. See you in the next adventure. Bye.